Good evening, everybody. My name is Haru Amin Ra,
I'm Patricia Marie.
and welcome to We Keep Us Safe, the Movement podcast show.
Money on land to build a new city jail. This is where they spend months and months scheming with jail prosecutors like J.E. Gunn and SFS architects on this despicable plan to lock up our people.
Like abundance, right? Like we don't have to go out of our neighborhood to get the things that we need. If we need to, get food or vegetables, there's like a vegetable garden or someone nearby who has access to those things that they're willing to share.
We're going to let y'all introduce yourselves. How about that?
Yeah. My name is Dylan Pyles. I'm an organizer and founding member of Decarcerate KC.
And I'm Amaia Cook. I'm the executive director and a founding member of Decarcerate KC.
All right, glad to have you on our show.
Thank you.
Our first episode, too.
Whoop,
First
whoop.
official
Yeah.
episode.
Yes.
So, getting right into this.
Let's
You
do
wanna
it.
Kick it off?
I can kick it off. So we've heard so much about Decarcerate KC, and we, again, are excited to have y'all here. And the first question is, what sparked the creation of Decarcerate KC?
Yeah, well, I would say that Decarcerate KC was years in the making. Many of us who were part of its founding had actually met in 2020 during the George Floyd uprisings. And a really big part of that was abolition and movement. And the organization kind of branched out of it as a way to sustain, abolitionist organizing in Kansas City. We had a lot of different stories that brought us together. But ultimately, it was about continuing to build community, continuing to build power, and create a city where we don't rely on systems of harm to keep us safe, but instead rely on systems of care.
Awesome. I like that. Anything you want to add to that, Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, I think, Maya's point about this is really rooted, I think, in people finding each other during a moment of serious political uprising and upheaval. And I personally was somebody who was pretty clear about my beliefs and values when it came to issues like policing in prisons. And when George Floyd happened, it's in the middle of COVID, 10,000 people hitting the street. I started looking for the people who were talking about abolition, right? Because not everyone was, right? When we were in the streets, not everybody was actually talking about what it would look like to build a world beyond policing, beyond prisons. There was a lot of talk about body cameras and reforming policing. And I was interested in the people who were out there saying we deserve more. We deserve to reimagine this entire thing. Wow. And that's how I found people like Amaia and Derek, who's in the room here with us working the camera. And really everybody who ended up becoming part of that founding cohort of Decarcerate KC, I found through the streets,
Beautiful. Beautiful. You said something powerful, deserving more. Can you kind of give us a little bit, kind of delve a little more deeper into that? What does that deserving more look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think for folks who get into abolition, a lot of the initial kind of question that we're asking that leads us there is, how many times are we going to do the same thing and get the same results, right?
Yes.
And I know for me, I grew up in a family that was impacted by incarceration from many different angles. And when I actually came into an understanding of my political identity, it was I could never separate how I felt about society and politics from the ways that prisons and policing impacted my family, the people that I loved. And I looked around and saw that issue being deflected or erased from political platforms, from presidential candidates, right? It's always kind of suppressed. And I think that the idea that we deserve more comes from, hey, regardless of what happens with elected officials, regardless of what happens in our like places of government, people are being disappeared into cages. People are being murdered by the police, you know, and we deserve more.
Absolutely.
We deserve answers.
Yeah, yeah.
Most
Seriously. Thank you.
So you said something important about abolition. For people, first time, it's a lot of people, this is going to be their first time hearing abolition. Can you explain what abolition is?
Yeah. So for, people who kind of hear the word abolition, I think the tendency is to understand it as like a tearing down of systems, of, police, of prisons, of jails. And in abolition, that is like one of the aspects. Because we understand that police, prisons, jails, they're not actually about, getting to the root causes of harm and violence. If anything, in the history of this country, it's been about oppressing people who are most oppressed, people who are marginalized. Tracing the history of policing, it was born out of, shutting down movements where people are, being silenced in their government.
In New York City, an officer seen nearly pulling one woman down and then pushing another against a car. In Tampa, officers pepper spraying a crowd as people shouted at the officers to get off of a woman they were trying to detain. And this morning, 2 cops in Buffalo, New York are under investigation after this disturbing video showing them shove a protester to the ground. That 75-year-old man suffering serious injuries, but the officer keeps walking as the man lies bleeding on the sidewalk. Across the country, police departments grappling with a wave of complaints against officers amid the ongoing protests. In Seattle, where a young girl was pepper sprayed by officers, the city says it has received more than 14,000 complaints since the protests began. In Fort Lauderdale, Florida, this officer is suspended and under investigation for shoving a peaceful protester on Sunday.
You got your knee on my man's neck, man.
In Sarasota, Florida, an officer on administrative leave and an investigation underway after this video from May surfaced showing him kneeling on the neck of a black man. And in Atlanta, 6 cops were charged with using excessive force while arresting 2 college students during Saturday night protests.
And in the U.S., it's looked like slave patrols capturing people who were escaping to freedom. During enslavement of thousands upon thousands of Black people in this country. So it is one aspect of looking at a system and seeing the harms that it's caused. And it continues to cause over hundreds of years. But another big piece of it is the building up of other systems of care, of things that actually keep us safe. When we're looking at a lot of the root reasons why people keep going in and out of jail or prison, it's oftentimes because there's something that is affecting a person on a individual level, whether it be mental health care, substance addiction, or it's just a societal, issue too, because we know that, people are, affected in their communities when there's a lack of resources, or, there's, systemic racism keeping people from opportunities in this country. So it's about looking at this issue of safety as being very holistic, and taking care of our neighbors, making sure that we have infrastructure for people to have opportunities in their life to get, healthcare, to get affordable housing, to get education that they deserve, and making sure that's, core in our abolitionist movement.
Okay.
Whew, all right.
That was a lot.
That was like,
It was
very
on point,
thorough.
though.
Yeah.
It was on point.
Why do you believe that this work matters right now in Kansas City?
Yeah, that is a good question. So in Kansas City, for me, one of the reasons that I invested in getting Decarcerate KC like off the ground with a group of people who I was blessed to find who were like-minded is because I desperately needed a an organization or a group of people. It didn't even have to be like an official organization. It just needed to be some people that were going to stand up to what I saw was like the consistent doubling down of our city leaders on punishment and policing in response to this idea of rising crime, right? Or this idea of Kansas City becoming uninhabitable, right? And I knew through experiences I've had with my family and also through the things that I'd come to understand by being in relationship with people who were impacted by these issues, that we're simply kicking the can down the road and spinning in circles if we continue to invest in the same things that have proven not to work, right? In Kansas City, one of the first things that Decarcerate KC organized around was the initial design costs for a new municipal jail. And we know that a municipal jail is largely being created for folks who have committed some sort of ordinance violation, right? These are, by the definition of the state, even very low level things. And Kansas City's, basically their willingness to invest money in incarcerating people for these types of things instead of investing in a place for them to sleep overnight so they don't have to trespass on a bench or something, right? The option to invest in people just never seems obvious to our leaders, right? And the thing is like the way that we can make it obvious is through people power, right? We know that we're all out there in the world feeling this like collective frustration at the way that our tax dollars are being handled, at the way that our city leaders are representing us. And that goes at the city, the state, and the federal level, right? We're all out here feeling the same frustration. And the only reason that the status quo gets to continue is because we're not talking to each other and saying, hey, I'm feeling this. Are you feeling the same thing? And more than anything, regardless of how we intervene at City Hall, winning or losing those fights, we win when we're connecting with each other and finding the commonalities between the frustrations that we have. And that's why Kansas City needs Decarcerate KC. That's why Kansas City needs organizing. That's why Kansas City needs abolition.
I love it. It's personal. Like it's first off personal. First and foremost, I felt like that's what I got. Like this is personal, and then when you join with others, like it becomes even more personal because that's where that community builds at. That's beautiful. Amaia, would you like to add anything on to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just like what you said, it is personal. Like many of us who are in the organization, Decarcerate KC or any, organizing space in Kansas City come because it's personal work. And of course there's times for joy, there's time for, community building. But a lot of that is built by, deep harm from these systems, from our city leaders. And for me, coming into abolition was at a time where I had lost my dad due to gun violence right after he had gotten out of prison. And it was a really, I would say, a revelatory moment in life, because for a very long time I had, just thoughts about the world and things that were messed up about it, and ultimately could never really figure out what, the root thing was. And once I was introduced to abolition and understood it as being something beyond just incarcerating someone when they slip up or make a mistake or, have an addiction, then I kind of broadened my horizons on what's possible. And in the city in particular, which is where he caught many charges, and many people's family members catch charges. And, it can be a first-time offense, a low-level offense, which then leads into a slippery slope of getting more offenses and then going to county jail and then going to prison. This is something that is critical. And especially now when we're seeing such an expansion on detention centers, millions more dollars put into policing. The federal administration is affecting us here locally. We see that our city leaders, opened arms to the FBI director, who is enforcing, a lot of prohibitions and restrictions and detainment on our neighbors. And so these things are definitely, very important now, but it's been years in the making, and many people's kind of history in their lives kind of bring light to that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's it's sad what we living through right now. That's what brought me to the work, though. Really, me being formerly incarcerated several times. When I came home this last time, I just knew it was something that I had to do. I knew it was something that I wanted to do, and that fire spark leaded me towards organizing, and eventually landed me here.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Ooh.
So, Amaia, what shaped your experience to be a leader?
That's a really good question. I don't think there's any like defining moment that kind of builds me as a leader. I think leaders can be built, from anything and anywhere. In our organizing, we believe that people's experiences and just willingness to show up is what makes them a leader. Yeah. And so I think that is probably like a recipe for what kind of put me on a path of wanting to develop my leadership, is just having personal experiences like many people in the organization, and just wanting to show up and caring about my community and wanting to make a difference.
Yeah. How about you, Dylan?
Yeah, I agree with what Amaia said. I think organizing has taught me a lot about the meaning of leadership and what it means to show up in your full self and in what you envision for yourself in the world, while also recognizing your place among others, right? And so I think for me, I was brought into a curiosity about what was happening in prisons and what was happening with our policing system because of little flickers of things throughout my childhood and growing up, and eventually becoming close with an aunt who had been incarcerated when I was a teenager. And those things got me curious about what we could be doing that we're not doing. And I could read books, I could watch videos with people like Angela Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who are beautiful touch points for us, talking really, important kind of like stuff about abolition and what this looks like. But it's like the people, actually like going and talking to people and saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm thinking, what do you think? And realizing that I wasn't alone, and that there's like a range of experience. You can come from a lot of different backgrounds, but if I go and say, hey, this is really messed up, right? There's a good chance that the person that I'm talking to is going to resonate and also going to have an experience similar to mine, whether they've personally been through the system or had a loved one who is impacted by it. And those are the things that have built my leadership, other people, right? I would say other people and curiosity, right? Those, like, if you just put those two things together, I think you can get pretty far and end up discovering things you would have never expected.
Yeah, that's a powerful.
Wow. that was. Wow. Thank you. Yeah, that was. I'm curious to know, like, how do you two keep each other accountable in this work?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with communication and transparency and just being really honest about where we're at in our own capacity and like where the organization may be at as well. I think there's always just been, like Dylan has mentioned, just a natural curiosity and of like knowing what's going on in the city, knowing what's going on in our neighborhoods and the organizing ecosystem. And I think that's kind of like drawn both of us into the work, if I could say that without making an assumption. And then I think beyond that, though, is just like the willingness to act on it. Because it's one thing to be curious, and then there's another piece of it is actually, moving in a direction to figure out what is actually the problem and talk to people and listen to people. So I think we kind of take that in our own like organizing relationship as well, and like showing up and being accountable to each other and accountable to this ongoing like organizing project that is Decarcerate KC. But beyond just like us, I think it, you know, it was accountability to the organization. Like there are people in the organization who are, we're building relationships with and, you know, are showing up and putting their own stories and time and energy into. And so it's just, that's like kind of the meat of it. And so we kind of have like a dynamic of being accountable to each other, people in the organization, and that allows us to, helps us to be very communicative and open.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I think, like, and this is true of everybody. I mean, there's a handful of people that I could list off who have been a part of Decarcerate KC from the beginning. And one of the early kind of things that we talked about and how we wanted to show up together in our community agreements, right, is this idea of like step up, step back, which is both in the sense of like when you're sharing space, being aware of how much space you're taking up and how much space others are taking up and making sure that there's room for everybody to be their full selves. But also that's like a commitment to being aware and intentional about your capacity and other people's capacity so that each of us can, so to speak, play a part, right? That makes sense for where we're at with our lives and the project that we're trying to, the goals that we're trying to achieve as a whole, right? And I think that's something that Amaia and I have always been like really serious about, right? And I think some of that too, if I'll be real, has to do with being really serious about our time and wanting to get shit done, right? And I think that that's something that we have like been able to hold each other accountable to, of like, in a way that is, that holds an awareness of, hey, I'm not like pushing you into anything that's going to extend your capacity, or I'm not trying to like say that you have to do it this way or do things this way, but like we made a commitment to move this stuff forward. How can we do it and still be our full selves and hold full lives, you know, in and outside of organizing? Because the reality is that this kind of stuff is both all engrossing because it's in every part of our lives, but it can also be overwhelming at times, right? And it can demand a lot of you, and being able to just like have open communication about that while sharing self-interest and understanding each other's self-interest, you know? Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I felt that a whole lot, especially with that time.
Yes.
Especially this one. She don't play about her time.
You shouldn't.
She don't play about her time, but yeah, I be having some one-on-ones. People be late. I done had a no-show. That no-show had me in my, I was like, I could have been doing something else besides driving all the way over here and waiting on you.
And
never return.
And that's a big piece of it too, though. It's like, you know, in developing leadership as someone in the org, like, you know, there are a lot of moments like that. More often than not, like having one-on-one scheduled and then you're waiting on the Zoom call and they're not picking up until hours later, or, you know, you have a goal set to have 20 one-on-ones by this date, and then maybe only 3 people actually respond. And I think like that's another part of building relationships with people in the org, and is having that groundedness with the folks who are here and showing up and knowing it's not just, you know, about the numbers or these measurements, but we have a long-term vision for something, and it's about continuing in that fight, knowing when things get hard, we're anchored with each other.
Most
So
definitely.
I feel that for sure, though.
So shifting a little bit, we're gonna focus on abolition and vision. And so
Lucky for you, I like talking about those things.
so how do you explain abolition when people call it unrealistic? Either one of you.
Because I hear this a lot, and it's like, so I'm ready for the breakdown, y'all.
You know, a really good way that I've heard someone explain it to me is just look around at the world as it is. You know, look at the ways our city invests in public safety, the millions upon millions of dollars that they send to the police every year, all the money that they spend to incarcerate people, all the lack of resources for healthcare, affordable housing, and education. And if you look around, just, grazing what we're seeing, that can be called unrealistic. Like, it's more unrealistic to look at things as they currently are, see the issues that currently exist, and say that we need to keep doing the same thing rather than try something different that actually gets to the reasons why people end up in and out of incarceration. And that's not to say that things will be magically fixed, if we, start putting more money into mental health care, substance resources, et cetera. But it is to say that if these are the reasons why many people, majority of people, end up going in and out of jail, of prisons, then there's likely to be a more realistic change in our communities when we invest in those things. So I think that's like, a pretty like easy way of thinking about it. And I think that's the way that we kind of think about things in Decarcerate.
Yeah, totally. And one thing I'll add to that too is there's this logical argument, right, about how the status quo as things currently are, we love to talk about how things aren't working. And this is a pretty bipartisan complaint, right? Whatever this is ain't working. That's why we need the new candidate on either side to come in and fix things, right? But when the discourse is only held in that like higher level of like political conversation, when the discourse is kept in the hallowed halls of city halls and state capitals and all of that, of course, the people who are living that crisis every day, right, are actually shut out of the conversation. And there might be a promise that whoever is elected is supposed to represent them, but they don't have access to the decision making at the end of the day when the bill gets signed, when the policy gets passed, when the budget gets enacted. And part of what I think Amaia is getting at is like, it becomes a narrative taboo to even suggest that we might try something different, right? And I think that that's intentional from the people who stand the most to gain from things staying the same, right? And so I would just say that as someone who's in this work and doing organizing and thinking about this a lot, like I even just push back against this idea that we have to like defend it at all, right? It's like, no, like all that abolition is coming from is this idea that there might be better options out there, and shouldn't we explore those, right? That's kind of the simple. But the other way that I like to think about this is when we talk about the practicality or the realistic. So we actually do have, when it comes to what I imagine abolition looks like, in a world where prisons and policing we are actually beyond them, right? And I like to think about a world beyond policing and prisons, not just a world absent of them, right? Because again, like one misconception about abolition.
What you mean by beyond?
Yeah. So one misconception about abolition that you already pointed to is just that it's just about tearing things down, right? And burning cop cars or whatever, right? And it's actually it's actually about a consistent dismantling that is coupled with a radical imagination and an implementation of that imagination. So right now, we can't even implement the things that we imagine for our communities because we're dealing with a state and we're dealing with a system of things that is resistant to that, right? So like what I imagine is something that for example, in my family, we started doing family circles every Sunday night, right? Where we sit and we recap the week, we talk about conflicts that we've had, tensions we've had with each other, expectations that weren't met, needs that weren't met. And you know what that looks a lot like is practices that have been ingrained and embedded in indigenous cultures since the beginning of time, right? And so, exactly, right. And so I imagine that, and I don't know exactly what it looks like. I can't tell you exactly what it looks like right now because I have these systems in my way. They're clouding my vision, right? But I imagine that, something like that on a broad scale, way out in the future beyond policing and prisons, right? And so when I think about this question of practicality, it erases this history of indigenous practices that is Native American, is from Africa, any place in the world pre-colonial, right? Any place in the world before the colonial influence of Western European dynamics has what I would call abolitionist practices, right? Carceral punishment in the system of prisons is a Western import, right? It is something that was brought to the Americas as one option for solving problems. And of course, when Native culture was erased and when genocide was committed, wiped away with that was, again, what I would consider a set of abolitionist problem-solving practices that were replaced by a carceral system that we know today. And that carceral system has just been emboldened and invested in and refined and reformed to this like really impenetrable force in our society. But we have examples all through history where we didn't have that. Right? And so it's not only is it not impractical, we actually have a lot of examples of what it can look like.
It's more documented time on Earth without the presence of policing than it is with the presence. Like that's some new shit. It's new.
I got a question, and I hope I asked this right, because I'm thinking of like the quote unquote abolition work that was done here in America, right? Do you feel like that abolition work was more of a cover up for the incarceral system? Or do you feel like the abolition work that was done, like for instance with the Quakers, was real work towards a more progressive America? Does that make sense?
Are you talking about in the context of like slavery, American slavery?
Yeah, and the abolition work here in America, right? Do you feel like that was more real abolition work, or it was more of a cover up for the incarceral system? Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's an interesting question.
I don't know, but that's
I get it.
I'm trying to wrap my head around it. So what do you mean by cover
when
up?
I say cover up, was it maybe a segue for us to come into this systematic area of oppression? Was it a setup for the people to come into this systematic state of oppression? Or do you feel like they were really doing abolition work, and where we're at now, they had no idea of us being here where we are now? Is that...
I think if I'm not answering it, just interrupt me.
It's fine.
But I think that there are like a couple iterations of abolition in the history of this country. Of course, there's the first iteration, which is abolition of slavery, which did lead into new forms of oppression on Black people. And I think that it points to a bigger thing around power, which is when there is even some phase of freedom or some phase of progress in this country, many times it's counteracted from people in power to regain some sense of control and some sense of power. So after that first iteration of abolition, of course, we had the Black codes, which were very specific ways of policing Black people after they had gained their freedom. Many times they were very small things, and people would be, incarcerated or chained because of that. And then after that, of course, we had the Jim Crow laws, other ways of policing Black people in this country, separating people based on race. And of course, that includes other marginalized people in this country as well. So we did see an expansion after abolition. But I wouldn't say it was the intention of the abolitionist movement to, result in that expansion. If anything, I believe that, people who oftentimes have power, which we know in organizing is the ability to act and the ability to make change, and in top positions of power will, counteract that progress. by continuing to inflict harm on people who are most marginalized. And then you see different ways, over time in this country, how whenever there are programs for people who are in poverty, that's counteracted by even more prisons being built. We see that in the 70s and the 80s, under an administration that's trying to, focus on social programs. Then there's another side of politicians who are like, well, we don't know if they're going to actually abuse those programs. We need ways to kind of enforce regulations. And so we're going to invest more into private prisons. And then we see so many things, so many areas where progress happens and that's pushed back against. But that's given where we started in this country and given where we are, I would say that it's very clear that there has been, changes that have resulted in the betterment, of society as a whole, of marginalized people as a whole. But I don't think that without abolition, we would be where we are.
And that's the point in asking that question. Yeah. So people with that unrealistic, I guess, understanding of abolition work can kind of see where that framework started from. And like, it's the same work though. Yeah. It's the same work. So you don't get like abolition without that progression, right? Without that tearing down. So thank you for
absolutely. And that you're right too, because even during, chattel slavery in the United States, people were saying, Black people, they're not even human beings. Like, they don't even, freedom for them, like, no, we're going to treat them like animals because their job is to work the fields, work our homes, and for the concept of abolition at that time was unrealistic to people because they didn't even see, Black people as fully human beings. So you're right, like, that's a good way of thinking about it as it is now when people point to, well, freedom from these punitive systems. What are you talking about?
Right.
So, yes.
This is the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, the idea, would be, for, I guess not everybody, but for I think many Americans, like a majority of Americans today, the idea that the abolition of slavery would be unrealistic. That'd be a really unpopular idea right now. But, we have like newspapers, like not just like underground newspapers, but like newspapers of record with, articles talking about how the world would erupt into chaos if slavery was ended, right? And that we would have complete anarchy, and the scare tactics that they used around the possible abolition of slavery are similar to the scare tactics that are used around the abolition of policing and prisons.
Shit, mirroring the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, they took the shackles off of us, but shit, they put mental shackles on the whole nation. It ain't just us no more. It's everybody's getting oppressed. Right. Black people get the worst of it, but if you're not a millionaire, billionaire, trillionaire, you ain't calling no big shots, no worldly shots. You went away and they gonna step on you. Yeah. So that's why we here together. Yeah. Abolitionist groups like us building up, standing against them, telling them hell nah. That's not right, and we ain't going for it.
And I think that's one of the last things too is really important, because I love this conversation about connecting abolition back through history. I consider the work that we do now to be part of the unfinished work of the original abolitionists, right? The way that I understand history after the quote unquote abolition of slavery is it's actually a process of the United States managing what we could call like the long revolt, the long slave revolt, right? It's an ongoing slave revolt, and all of the policies that we see in the wake of the emancipation, all of the continued evolution of those policies up into the war on drugs, up into immigration policies, right? All of that is about managing a revolting population, right? Revolting in the sense of like revolution, not, but managing a population that is basically at the cusp of revolt, as the slave population was, right? And as abolitionists today, part of what we're doing is continuing that work in the tradition of and as an extension of, imagining new things that they couldn't even imagine, right? Until we're all free.
Most definitely.
that.
No one's free till we are free.
Yeah, that's real. Which goes into the perfectly to the next question. What does we keep us safe mean to you?
That's
Yeah.
good. That's good.
Yeah.
So we keep us safe is actually a really common phrase that's used in abolitionist spaces and some organizing spaces, just around like how community can show up for each other. It's the idea is that we have all that we need. There is, no scarcity. There is no, lack of, at least, for what the world provides.
Yes.
It's just a matter of us organizing to get those material changes. And in doing so, building up, ways of caring for each other. When people go missing in our community, showing up and mobilizing to get them found. When people get arrested, showing up, to care for them, to pay for their bail. Some of the things that Decarcerate KC has already done and already worked on. Another example of what we're currently working on with our Safety Hubs team, which is essentially a way for us to organize in neighborhoods, connecting with people directly who live there so that they can sort of build up these separate hubs and create, systems of de-escalation and harm reduction, is our Safety Hubs Academy. And what we're doing is connecting people and where they are locally, and sort of expanding this idea that we in our neighborhoods, we know our neighbors, we can show up for our neighbors even if there's like someone needs some eggs, or someone's, they don't have enough money for groceries for the week. Like there's a way for us to plug in and support each other. I'd say that's the concept.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to continue on that, the idea of that Amaia brought up of scarcity, right? This scarcity, there is a very real sense in which we don't have access to our material needs, right? However, that's a manufactured thing by the systems that are in place right now, right? And it's also, again, for me, one check on the abolition side. It's evidence that this system is not working for people, right? And so there's not much in whatever system this is that feels like it can be saved in the better version of our society, right? But the stuff is there, right? Like the materials are actually out there existing, right? We just have to figure out how to organize them to get them into the hands of people. And that comes through mutual aid projects, right? And that comes through mobilizing for bail support. That comes, all through all these different things. But at the end of the day, what that is it's just that's an actionable practice of what I think is a mindset and sort of a philosophy that our communities have access to, because we do it oftentimes in our families or on our blocks. But we've been told that we can't do it on a larger scale. And we've also been told that it's not political, right? So we've been told that when you give your cousin a ride to the airport or whatever, right? Something super mundane, every day, kind of like cousin calls you up and need to get to the airport at 4 a.m. You're like, I got to be at work at 6, but I guess, I'll get up early and take you to work or take you to the airport. That kind of thing is actually a perfect little kernel of what's possible on a larger networked scale of mutual accountability, right? And mutual support for each other. Right. And I think that what we keep us safe means is I'm going to wake up and actually live that every day, knowing also that I have to hold my own capacity and I have to not completely spend myself, and I also have to be invested in as I invest in others, right? But it's basically waking up with that mindset of what would it look like to have that level of care that we're actually pretty used to showing people in our small circles extended to the whole kind of human family, right? And so the idea of safety hubs is let's do that in 5-6 neighborhoods, and eventually, those 5-6 neighborhoods are going to connect, and we're going to have a region instead of 5 or 6 neighborhoods. Then we're gonna have a city. And then we're, and I think that that's kind of the bet that we're making, right? Is that as these things connect, it will grow to a point beyond what people think is currently possible.
Yeah, that's beautiful. How have y'all found people responding to the safety hubs and connecting to that?
Yeah, I mean, people have been pretty excited. We've had different phases of the safety hubs. The academy is a new one,
Okay.
and it officially launches next weekend. So it's a 6-week program, and we've gotten a decent number of applications so far, and a lot of people who are interested in starting their own projects, starting their own hubs, and building in their communities. And so even just through this first cohort, just seeing people wanting to invest in their neighborhoods is something that I think is just really beautiful to see. Because I think, sometimes we hear oh, people just want to keep to themselves. They don't really care about, what's going on in their neighborhoods. Or at least I've heard before, things are not like how they used to be. And I guess living in a time where people would be up on their front porch and talking to their neighbors and, looking around, see what the neighborhood kids are doing. That's what I've heard a lot. But I beg to differ, and seeing these applications alone, or just, being in Decarcerate KC, people showing up for one another. Just an excitement around building and keeping each other safe.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
That's the magic of imagination. Because I remember when I first came to Kansas City around this time last year, and I first heard of the mention of the safety hubs, and seeing where it's at now. Now we're doing the Safety Hub Academy.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. Recently, there was something earlier this year around public safety, a campaign, right?
Yeah.
And I think you guys weighed heavy in on that around the public safety sales tax, right? So a question, I didn't catch you off, did I?
Who?
You. Was you done?
No,
Okay,
yeah,
because look, I'm interested to get in this question because
Get in it.
that's leading into public safety, right?
Yeah.
What myths or lies about public safety frustrate you the most, and especially and particularly around the campaign that recently happened around public safety, and we know how they, misled, residents of Kansas City. So let's kind of dive into that. Yeah, to the polls. Yeah, they did. Yeah.
I mean, again, I think it's a good way to open that conversation is the single-sided nature of what's possible when we think about public safety, right? Something pretty much every year the city of Kansas City and probably every other major city puts out a survey to get feedback from their residents. What issues are you most concerned about, right? And pretty consistently, public safety is at the top of the list. And that's logical, right? However, there's a complete lack of consistency in what I might consider public safety and what you might consider public safety and what person down the street considers public safety. The city, however, has a pretty clear definition, and you can find it in the budget, right? When you go to public safety, right? What's the money spent on?
Jails,
policing, jails, incarceration. Fire department gets a little bit of money, right? Our emergency services get a little bit of money, but we know that it
see the new cars they just
pales in comparison. Yeah, they got ATVs now.
They can hit alleys and stuff.
They can hit the alleys, and so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy isn't exactly the right kind of phrase for it. But when they go out and they do these surveys and they say, what are you concerned about as a Kansas City? And then people say public safety. Well, they might be meaning I need speed bumps out in front of my street because my kids played, kick the soccer ball on the street and people drive by through here too fast, right? Those are the types of things that could potentially fall under a consideration of public safety, but that never gets translated to the city's priorities. And this isn't just a Kansas City problem, right? And so I think that it's because, and this is one reason to go back to an earlier question, that Decarcerate KC and Decarcerate KCs of the world must exist, is because they provide a counterbalance to that single story that is told about what public safety is, right? And so I'll start with that. I'll let Amaia jump in. We might. This is a big one.
That was a great way of putting it.
I'm ready to put my 2 cents in.
Well, no, you got to. I think that's what this should be.
No, go ahead. Go ahead if you have something.
I was just gonna say that was my whole idea coming up with this podcast show, to counter their narrative. Because I'm tired of turning on whatever I turn on and seeing they bullshit ass narrative. Like, come on, like that's not what we're really living through.
Right. Yeah.
We're really living through the harm that y'all fancy projects or whatever y'all come up with,
the ATVs like, and the drones and
all this stuff is to protect the wealthy's wealth. It does nothing about protecting public safety of the community. Nothing.
And I actually think the ATVs actually may increase, right? Police involved, shootings, because if you're driving through alleys and there's no cameras and things like that, and you might not have your camera on, now you done shot somebody in the alley. So it's kind of opening up people really being more endangered, right? Versus in people in the community being more endangered by those that are supposed to protect and serve. So that's interesting.
They scary. They not riding them things in nobody alley.
I mean, well, because they saying like,
they will,
but it creates scary. To me now. I'm thinking as a resident, like that creates a public safety concern for me and my neighbors in the neighborhood who may innocently be caught up in the alley, and you think that my neighbor is a suspect, and you shoot and kill him. So then. Oh Lord. Okay. So I want to hear from you though, but yeah.
Sorry. Can we see the question again? I kind of got into your conversation. So
what myths or lies about public safety frustrate you the most?
Yeah, I would say, Dylan kind of summarized it well, with just things always needing to be kind of single answer. And even when it's not, even whenever it is, say a city elected, well, we need to invest in police and we also need to invest in these things, knowing that the reality of our city is that it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. They're not investing hundreds of millions of dollars in preventing people from going to jail. They're not investing hundreds of millions of dollars into the REACH program, which we found, even in its first, few months of operating, just really great success and being in the neighborhood and connecting people to resources and care. And the REACH program was one of the first, alternative services that Decarcerate KC organized for, which is a pre-arrest diversion program. So it sends out responders when there are moments of crisis happening in the community, and they connect those individuals directly to housing, to getting their IDs, to food. And one of the people who was unhoused for years finally just got fully furnished housing. And so we're seeing lives change in these types of programs, but we're not actually seeing the same investments that they're putting into building new jails, which are going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, into the police, which get millions more dollars per year, despite having a plethora of issues. So I think that is probably one of the biggest frustrations that I have around public safety. And of course, I had a lot of very specific frustrations in that campaign. There are a lot of misconceptions, I think, about city jail and who ends up in city jail, and like the numbers of who committed what, ordinance violation. And so we saw a lot of people taking advantage of fears around jails. People thought, if you killed someone, you were going to a city jail, which was just, it was not the case at all. And even after the campaign was over, I was actually overhearing someone who sits on a pretty high board in the city. And they were saying, like, we don't need people who are, killing people going to just out and about. They need to go to city jail. And, there's a whole layered conversation around that, but it's just like the lack of information and the willingness to let misinformation continue. It was, a really big frustration. So it's something that we're keep continuing to have conversations about. Like Haru said, the podcast is one of the ways that we can give our own narrative and give out information to clear things up. But that was definitely one thing.
I want to bounce off something you said real quick too, because I think that through the campaign we saw this like really magnified, but it's a constant struggle in this work, that the systems as they're set up, what they call the justice system, right, is intentionally confusing, is intentionally scattered, is intentionally difficult to crack. And so when somebody who holds an elected position says something that they might legitimately misinterpret or misunderstand about how the jails work, right? Or about how the prosecutor's office works, it then goes on record as true, whether or not it is, because they're speaking from an authority principle, right? And part of what we really struggled with in that public safety sales tax campaign was elected officials continuously saying things that were not true, but they sounded true enough that no one questioned it, right? And like I said, we could probably talk all day about like the specifics of that particular challenge, but without a Decarcerate KC organizing against it, those misconceptions would live in people's head and would live on the record as the truth, right? And you basically have a system that is so hard to crack and so hard to navigate that your average person is just going to be like, yeah, I don't know, that's what the mayor said, right? It's got to be true. Yeah. And the mayor himself also doesn't know, right? He also doesn't know because it's also confusing to him. Wow. And when he's called out, he may or may not correct the record, depending on whether it's politically advantageous. You know what I mean? So that's like the really difficult thing when you're organizing campaigns, and they do have a power imbalance, compared to the power that we have, but not for long.
Yeah, period.
No, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to ask y'all this. Both of y'all, either one of y'all. Can y'all share a story of a time where community kept each other safe versus the police?
I can. I'm just thinking.
Which one?
Yeah. I think one actually, I don't want to go into like a whole rabbit hole, but I think one of the ways that was really clear just in organizing in Kansas City was a couple years ago, it was discovered just from community members that a lot of Black women who ended up on Prospect happened to go missing. And other than the community members, there really wasn't a whole lot of coverage on this. In fact, the KCPD was very quiet about the community members' concerns, and it wasn't until a local Black news organization covered the story, went to the community town hall that they were having, published their stories, things started to get attention. And it was actually when things started to blow up, the police made an official report that no Black women were missing. And it was just people's emotions heightened. Even some local news publications here dismissed the story, said that it was blown up, and essentially they dismissed these community members' voices. And eventually, I believe it was maybe a couple months later or so, they found a woman, and it's very terribly
up north.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
yeah,
found
that.
yeah.
I
That's
do
that's when I
remember
just
that.
heard about the story.
Yeah,
I just
Yeah.
read it.
crazy.
Yeah, and it probably made like national news
Ooh.
because of how, you know, tragic it was.
She came back and spilled the beans and told then he had one of her friends too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she was able to escape.
Yeah, she
Yes,
escaped.
one of them
Yeah.
was able to escape, and then I believe it was someone connected to her. But they
Yeah.
found these missing women who came from Prospect,
Yeah.
you know, in this man's home, and it was only because of this, you know, organizing that was happening, and actually listening to people's stories on the ground
Right.
about their neighbors.
And they tried to
that-
silence them.
They-
yeah, they did.
They did silence them, and not just silence, they dismissed
Missed it,
people.
yeah.
Like they actually said,
Black lives.
this is not actually happening. And so that's like, you know, so even something that's ongoing with that story, because the person, you know, who had these women in, I'm forgetting what Ben's essentially is moving into a trial phase, but like that was a huge thing of keeping people safe in Kansas City when the police weren't actually doing that.
That's good. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just, that's like such a really strong example of the ways that the systems that are propped up and fed money, right? They actually don't keep any communities safe, but there's specific communities and specific types of people that they not only don't even offer them the illusion of safety, right? It's a complete sense of abandonment, and it's on purpose, right? And so that's an example of the community itself that was impacted by this issue, because it's terrifying, right? And it's unsettling, and it feels very unsafe coming together to essentially fill a need that the state was never going to fill, right? But I would also just point to any number of mutual aid projects or rapid response projects that I've seen happen from the Kansas City organizing community. And the thing that I love about having a strong organizing ecosystem is that these things can grow out of connection points between different organizations, and also through each individual organization having their own goal in mind and understanding how it relates to the goals of other organizations, right? So one project is Confluence Harm Reduction. This is a group that goes and distributes safe use kits to drug users throughout the Kansas City area. And this is, of course, would be a deeply unpopular political thing to put into policy with our current Kansas City Council, but it legitimately saves lives, right? And it's a very quiet thing that happens. It's something that is making, like when we think about like keeping people safe, i.e. not dying, right? Like it makes a legitimate change in people's lives on a day-to-day basis. I also think about these like impromptu rideshare programs that pop up for folks to get to doctor's appointments or court dates, right? These formations, these experiments, right, are, again, back to this idea of we keep us safe, what that really means. But they're also people realizing that the government, the state, the policies are never going to come and fill these gaps, right? And they also want to disempower us from doing it ourselves. So they keep us in crisis, right? And when people step up, I think that's when we see this like kind of like snowball effect, right?
Right.
I got an example, right? The biggest thing that happened that affected not me personally, but my family and my friends back home was the tornado that hit St. Louis and May. Like the system totally disregarded my city. I'm someone with zero help, but community came together and they got this shit done. Like a friend of mine, his whole top floor was gone. And that's, I'm like, I known them all my life. We grew up together. That's their house. Community came and brought a whole new floor within a week. They was there the next day. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is beautiful how we get to come together as a community and pull our resources together. And it seems like, I think a lot of times we don't realize the power of resources that we have amongst ourselves until like something,
Crisis.
really, happen. It's like we have collective power. We just have to recognize that power within. I think we often associate ourselves with so much external power because we've been taught that, this form of authoritarianism, the isms. And so a lot of times we kind of reflect on that.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to 5 Minutes of Freedom, where I give you your abolitionist news. My name is Jasmine, and I will be your host. If you have any voices that need to be heard or stories that need to be shared, please let me know at Black Issues 101 on Instagram. Let's jump into some local news with Frank White being voted out of office. Voters were very upset about him raising the property taxes, and rightfully so, which caused for his recall on his votes. Now, there are 3 top candidates right now who are being talked about, who are looking towards that county executive position. Their names are Darren McGee, who is the county legislator chair, Dan Tarwater, who was the former county legislator chair, and Phil Lovato, who is an attorney. Now, this role will last them until November 2026, and that timeline overlaps with the completion of the jail. Now, county officials have said that the jails are overcrowded and that this new jail that is completed will also be overcrowded. My question is to whoever is in that position, what are you going to do about these conditions? I'm not trying to rhyme, but this is very real. Now, for national news, let's jump to Chicago. I was on Instagram and I found a page called Chicago Community Jail Support, and they help people who were recently released from Crook County Jail get what they need. They are right now tracking people who are released from the jail, Crook County Jail, between 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. Now, those conditions, weather-wise, can be very extreme, especially in the wintertime, where it can be fatal, especially for people who are older. And then during the summer, it is very late and you only get one call. I know I don't answer on the first ring, and especially if I'm asleep, I'm not really answering on the first ring because I can't hear it. So these people are stuck in the cold, in the heat, waiting in the just outside. So what Chicago Community Jail Support does is they help people get to point A to point B, help them get their belongings, get food, just help them out in that time of need. So if you would like to donate, their Instagram is Shy Community Jail Support, and I think that shout out to them. So for my last topic, but not least, it's about the Pendleton 2. The Pendleton 2 are 2 men named John Balagoon Cole and Christopher Name Trotter. These 2 men jumped up and rushed into action to save a fellow inmate's life, and that caused them to have get a life sentence because of that. They were put in a prison where there were known KKK group called the Sons of Light, and they were guards in that prison. So one day, the guards were like, hey, today we're beating on him being Lincoln Love. So they beat and was torturing this man, and Naeem and Balagoon caught word, and they went and did what they needed to do to get these guards off of him and get Lincoln Love to safety. Now, you can learn more about them on pendleton2.com. They have a documentary you can watch if you're interested in learning more. They have action items you can do. What else do they have? They let me see on my notes. They have a lot of things you can do on their website. You can donate, you can watch the documentary, learn more about them, and you can also participate in action items. So I think that's just, yeah, that's great. Um, and I've watched the documentary. It is very good. You should go watch it. Um, get some tissues because I did cry. Now, please go and talk to your neighbor this week. If you've already talked to one neighbor, go talk to another one and connect. Learn the people around you. Y'all have a nice day and goodbye.
I got a question. And not to pick on the individuals that like see the abolition work as unrealistic. Yeah. But like if prisons and police were to vanish tomorrow, what would keeping the community safe look like? You know, like because I feel like people, you know, need to understand like if it what would it look like? What would community safety look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it, I think one is like informed by what abolitionist projects have, you know, already been being worked on, already exist. And also like saving space for, we don't know everything. Mm-hmm. And that's a part of it too, because abolition is about experimentation and looking at a community's needs. It's not about going into communities saying, y'all need this and this is what we're going to build. But as far as like what our organizing tells us and like being in community, that looks like having accessible mental health care so that when people are in crisis, there's a way to de-escalate. And we see that happening realistically with the program that we organize for. Having care navigators going throughout the streets, de-escalating harm, de-escalating conflict, and connecting people to housing. And on housing, having actual affordable, accessible housing for people. We are at a deficit in the city with the availability of affordable housing. And even for people just wanting to get, you know, temporary, short-term stay, there's wait lists for weeks for people who are struggling to, you know, find a place to stay. So it's having that accessible, affordable housing as a part of public safety. It's about substance use treatments, making that, you know, be about care, be rooted in care, not having to go to a treatment center and have to actually be tested for something just to get accepted into a program, not having to wait weeks to get into a program. And also, if you don't want to get into a program, having something that allows you to do something like outpatient, having therapy readily available, having you know, different forms of drugs to kind of wean you off of what you currently might be on. And then there's just, you know, crisis care centers, community care centers that can be built in place. Youth programs, investing in our youth. We see that as being, you know, a project that folks in other organizations across the country who are focused on abolition have, you know, invested in a lot around youth mentorship and youth guidance, getting people invested in their education as well. So I think there's a lot that can be said about if these things don't exist, what we can, you know, put in their place. to actually keep the community safe.
That's good.
I think too, first of all, I respect the question, and I also think that it's not a super helpful question, right? And so what I would tell even somebody who was coming to sort of like challenge ideas that I might have, right, is, well, I would say the question is probably something closer to what can we build in the world as it is that will bring us closer to some sort of agreement of the world as it should be, right? So instead of talking about, okay, police and prisons are gone tomorrow, what would you tell somebody who's worried about that, right? I would say, well, what is the world that you want to live in look like? What does that look like, right? And I would hope to catch that conversation as a way to bring us back around to what we would do if police and prisons vanished tomorrow. Because I think once we can get an alignment about the world that we actually want to live in, most people don't want to live in a world with policing and prisons, actually, right? Because they want to live in a world where people are safe, where people feel secure, where we don't have to fear one another, right? That's actually a desire that most people hold, regardless of whatever their background might be. And I think that all of those things that Amaia said come up in those conversations when you ask the question instead of, well, what is the world that you would be safe in? What does that look like? What is that world? What's in that world? And then we start placing those things in that world, right? And then when we come back around to the question of, okay, police and prisons are gone tomorrow, it's less about this like desolate dystopian image and more about how do we put those things in place, right? So that when the police and prisons do disappear or phase out or whatever it looks like, these things are there. It has been built. It has been prefigured, right? And I also think something that I'll add in general is you talked about this earlier. I thought it was really great. The system as it is, and I know that I'm kind of gesturing to the system, right? But the system as it is very much reliant on us being scared of each other. It perpetuates fear. It stokes fear, right? And the idea is, that, well, if police and prisons vanish tomorrow, then I will be more afraid than I am today, right? And I think that there's something that we really have to step back and investigate there about why we are afraid of each other, actually, right? And I think that I don't have necessarily the space to like dive super down. Maybe that'll be its own, we do a whole podcast on fear, right? But I would say that one of the reasons, for example, that there are not more youth programs right now is because people are afraid of youth. And they've been taught to be afraid of youth going back through the Clinton administration, back into the Reagan administration, and then the Nixon administration, and then, and all the way back to this moment of the emancipation of the slaves, where a project was started specifically around Black children, right? Specifically around groups that had been traditionally subjugated through slavery, right? To create a sense of fear that would separate you from them, right? And I also say this as like a white person, right? Who grew up with these forces very much at play, right? Trying to get me to fear people who didn't look like me, right? Trying to get me to fear and to live in this like perpetual state of fear. And I think that every day we have to wake up and actually reject that. That's a lie, right? Like we have to wake up and reject that fear. And the work starts there, right? The work starts at that rejection of fear.
That's beautiful.
That was deep.
Because you brought it back full circle, even on the question. Because then you put the person in a position, right, like you said, to make the decision and have this aha moment. Like, we don't need prisons or jails. Like, this is almost it becomes a figment.
Right, yeah. And it's like we actually don't want to live in the world that we have those things, because that means that we're living in fear.
I think if we did a survey, a national survey, and asked people, give people like 10 things that they want in their community. And it ain't gotta be no cap. Just ask what they want. What does a world they imagine look like, and just put certain things in there. It'd probably be 5-7% say have police in them.
Very few people are going to say, police in prisons, right?
Yeah. And there have been like national organizations who've conducted like surveys, like statewide surveys, and gathered that information. And you will actually find like a majority of people, you know, even if it's not necessarily wanting abolition, they want to see reforms that lead to people's rehabilitation in regards to public safety, even in states like swing states. I can't remember the name of the organization, but if I remember, I'll bring it back up. They, you know, also want to, and so it's not really like a contested issue when you look at this country as a whole. But it is, you know, a lot of it is about like narrative and continuing to bring people together to see this other vision of what's possible, for sure.
Can we do like a parks and peace? I don't know, like, you know, fuck the police, prison type thing, and do like a park and peace. I don't know. I just seen like a PP, like a park and peace. I don't know.
Park and peace work.
I don't know. I just had this vision, like,
What's
you
a-
know, because
what's-
we're talking
what's a
about
park and peace?
replacing prisons and police, but like when you ask people what they want to see, a lot of people like parks, and a lot of people just want peace.
Right.
You
Yes.
know, so like
Parks
park and peace
yeah.
or something. I don't know.
I
I'm
love
just,
it,
I love that.
Instead,
Yeah.
because it's policing prisons, parks and peace.
yeah,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
No
we-
police in prison.
Almost-
More parks and peace.
Yeah, so I'm, you know, shifting the narrative.
No, actually.
Right. Yeah.
So, I got a question. What practice or rituals keep you guys grounded?
Whew, I like that.
That's a great question.
Yes. Well, on a personal level, I would say faith is really important to me. Making sure that every day I am starting out in a place of gratefulness for life and gratefulness for the people around me, because it is really hard work. Like it's something that can be really challenging. And depending on the day, can be even more challenging than the day before. And so the way that I ground myself is every time I wake up, just giving blessings to who I believe is the one who brought me here. And just a gratefulness for what I'm able to do, because it is, you know, a privilege to show up every day. Not, you know, people... we have a choice in how we show up, and sometimes those choices can be very limited. But I'm grateful that I'm in the position that I'm in now to organize with people and to build power with people. And then, of course, things like, you know, just being in community. That's always very grounding for me, and setting intentional time, ways that I can separate my public and my personal life, of course. But I'm always making sure that when I am showing up, you know, I'm showing up in my capacity. Have affirmations that I do every morning as well. So one of them is on capacity. Like when you're showing up, even when it's hard, show up in your capacity. So those affirmations and understanding that it's bigger than just me as well. It's bigger than even just like one organization here in Kansas City. It is, to me, I believe that we should all be living lives of holding ourselves accountable to one another, and living lives that are bent on liberation. And that's about like speaking justice, speaking truth. And being in, and this is a little bit different, and maybe like the religious background that I'm in, but it's not necessarily being in service, but it is about caring for your neighbors. So yeah, I think that's ultimately what grounds me every day, that I'm in this work.
How about you, Dylan?
I want to actually just pick up something that Amaia just said, because I think it's like brilliant and something that drives a lot of how I think I've learned to show up in Decarcerate, which is that care and service are not the same thing, right? Like care and showing up in care and showing up for care is different than like serving, right? And I think that there's all kinds of like ways we could talk about why that's important for organizing in the long term, because burnout is real, right? But For me, yeah, scroll on Instagram, do Wordle, no, I think that it's a combination. So I'm a pretty like creative person, and that's actually another part of my journey to abolition is that it's creative, right? And so one of the things that pulls me back, even in my own doubts and my own wrestling with things, is this is the creative option for my political feelings about the world, right? And I, especially in the past year, have really come back into a practice of music, which was really important for me, like as a younger person, and something that I had been, just because with like the busyness of life, had not been like focusing on over a little spell of time. But I think that spending time in that space of like creation actually gets my like creative juices flowing for organizing, right? Like I feel like when I'm feeling stale around like work that we might be doing with Decarcerate or work that's happening in the community, I know that I might need a creative a session with music or something creative outside of organizing work, right? That can kind of like spark that part of my brain up, because that part has to be active for the organizing to feel.
So we got a mic check coming on. A 1, 2, 3.
Right,
We about to get on.
I could have brought the guitar. We could have done a little.
Play a little string.
Yeah. So yeah, we got a jam. We need a Decarcerate band.
Jam session.
I love that.
But so music is huge, and I also think I tend to live in my head a lot, like, and always have, but like sort of like embodied practices are very important for me. And it's like I've always loved basketball, but I got into playing it regularly like a couple years ago, simply because it's like all of your body moving at once, right? And like it's not about like it's literally just and I just like shooting free throws or something, right? You realize to like learn how to shoot free throws well and to like get a technique down, you're moving almost every muscle from your toes up through the top tips of your fingers, right? And so like, and so on my best days, right, I'm shooting 100 free throws a day, but I don't always have the time for that. But I'd say it's a mix of those things, right? Like the creative energy, and then like whatever sort of thing I can do to get my body moving.
Okay. Nice answers. You want to take us into a closing?
Yeah, I can. So I'm sure like the lines is buzzing. Y'all hear the phones ringing, right? So like if folks want to like donate and volunteer with Decarcerate KC, what are some ways they can do that to help strengthen the movement?
Yes. That's my good question. So the way that people can donate is going to our website, decarceratekc.org. Okay. If you want to donate specifically, you'll go to decarceratekc.org/donate. Okay. And if you just want to get involved, if you're wanting to organize, learn more about the movement, you can go to decarceratekc.org/contact. Okay. So there are a couple ways, but we're also pretty active on our social media. Okay. So even just sending us a DM to connect with us.
What's the social media?
Decarcerate KC on all platforms.
Yeah.
Follow us.
All platforms.
All of them.
Okay, maybe not TikTok.
Maybe
not TikTok.
Yeah, it's coming.
Not TikTok.
Okay.
Or there's some new ones these days.
Blue
these
Sky.
kids, I don't know. But
I haven't heard of Blue
Sky.
Sky.
It's a Twitter alternative.
There's also Blue Sky.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't have Blue Sky, but we're not on that.
So look it up.
And then decarceratekc@gmail.com is our email. So if you're someone who wants to email, please email us at that email address. But those are the main ways I would say. Oh, and there's actually, you know what? Let me not. Those are the main ways. Yeah.
Okay. We'll leave it there.
Okay. So, what do you want people to take from this conversation we have? The audience. What you want viewers to take from this conversation?
I think there's there's one thing that everybody shares. I think I'm hoping that people can take layers of things depending on like where they're at with their own kind of journey. But I think a big thing is like get very real about the difference between the world as it is and the world that you want to live in, right? And I think recognizing the differences between those two things is the ultimate sort of agitation that we need to get in the game, to organize, right? To be a part of something. And that something, being a part of something, doesn't have to be Decarcerate KC, right? Maybe you are ready to fill a lane that is currently open in Kansas City or in your city, right? But I think that the big thing is like it's harder than we think to stop and take stock of, okay, this is the world as it is. These are the things that are fucked up and that I actually cannot live with. And these are the things that are in the world that I want to live in, right? It seems so simple, but it's pretty hard. We very, very, very few of us, I think, really take the time to figure that out. And so I think that's probably what I would suggest, or what I would hope that everybody would be doing.
Yeah, I would circle back to what we talked about in the beginning, just showing up and organizing and being curious and just being willing. You don't have to know every single like technical term. You don't even have to share, a political identity as someone. You don't have to be an abolitionist, quote unquote, to be a part of Decarcerate KC. It's just about being willing to, be in a space where people come from many different places, have different experiences, even have different thoughts about public safety, and are willing to grow in that as well. There may have been moments, like if you're watching and listening, you might have been challenged, and that's okay. Like it's not about agreeing with everything. We say exactly, or even in the organization exactly. We show up and we share. We're vulnerable with each other. We have a specific community agreement on, if we have an issue, we have an issue with the idea at hand and not the person. So it's, for me, I hope people take away that willingness to show up and be present, and not showing up and having to be perfect. There's no such thing as being perfect, but that presence is like a really, really important piece. So.
Beautiful. Thank y'all.
Yeah, thank y'all for joining us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Beautiful.
A very special guest.
Don't want it to end.
Amaia Cook Dylan Pyles, Decarcerate KC's finest.
That's right. That's right.
Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll be back with y'all in a couple of weeks for the next episode.
But before you go, comrade, I got a question though, real quick. How you feeling?
How I'm feeling?
Yeah.
Oh man, I feel like a surfer early in the morning on the highest wave.
Ooh.
That's the world I want to live in.
I love it. I love it. Give me some, dog.
Let's build that world.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Okay. So,
how about you? How you feeling?
You know what? I feel amazing. I'm like on this thing of like manage your light. Manage your light. And when you manage your light, like you get to develop the glow in your environment. So that's like where I'm at. So I'm managing my light, like in spite of like I'm creating the glow.
Oh, so you finna go deep and philosophical.
Match my comrade energy over here and over here. So,
well, I'm gonna
we vibrating.
I've been doing this one thing myself, working on myself. I think everybody else could do is finding the lesson and the message in every situation.
Yeah.
Man, it's been helping me build my character, helping me just build my relationships and pay attention to things that's going on around me and inside me. Asking myself the hard questions like, why I feel like this about this. Because instead of just reacting all the time, ask yourself why before you react. Right. You might have a valid reason, or you might just be in your head. So yeah, it's been working for me.
That's good.
So good.
Okay, cameras off. We turn into a therapy session, y'all.